Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 398 of the Running Rogue podcast. This is your host, Chris McClung, joined by co-host James Dodds, inching towards that 400 episode mark. We should talk about something special for that.
I was actually just thinking that, and I was like, I wonder if he'll do something special. That's a milestone.
I mean, it is a milestone. We need to brainstorm it a little bit, maybe take suggestions from the audience. But today we finish our little series on the training phases. So we're getting into the taper and post-race recovery phases 4 and 5 of the work after talking about base, strength, and race specific over the last 3 weeks. So we'll dig into all of that, but I guess first, just happy Boston Marathon weekend coming.
We are absolutely on the same wavelength. Before we even hit record, I was going to ask you, when do you take off? I know you're very involved every year. So yeah.
It's perhaps my favorite running trip of the year. Headed to Boston, leaving Friday. We'll be there until Tuesday, supporting our crew of Rogue athletes, as well as getting involved in some of the other festivities. So yeah, excited. It's going to be fun as always.
Yeah. I've got 2 on the private roster. And then of course our virtual team Rogue group has a big crew going. So there's going to be a lot of rogues out there.
A lot of rogues. And that's always fun. I think the other cool thing about any of these destination trips is that you get people from different parts of our world coming in together. So folks from Austin, Dallas, but then all of our virtual groups, as well as our virtual one-on-one athletes. So you kind of get to see them mix and mingle and meet each other. And that's always a good time. So,
yeah. And even those that live there, but may not be racing, they're like, we'll come over and, run the 5K or just spectate.
And support. Yep. So we've got people in that camp as well, which is always fun and welcome. But yeah, we'll have our little standard menu of events for Rogue athletes in Boston. We've got a shakeout run on Sunday, my famous pre-race talk on Sunday afternoon, and then our post-party afterwards. So it's going to be a good time.
That's awesome.
For those that are going to be there from the Rogue world, make sure you're in on those activities. And I hope to see you there, as well as anybody who might be listening. If you see me, say hi. So that's always exciting. And then, of course, the races are going to be great as well. Marathon Monday is always, a de facto holiday in the running world, in a sense, where even those that aren't there kind of secretly watching on their computers at work on Monday and probably much less productive than normal, which is the perfect tradition for Patriots Day in Boston.
I think there's a way to do that and be very productive. Like you keep it on mute, put it on the second monitor over there, and then you're working away and you finish an email and you look up and you're like, ooh, and then you go back and work away and then you just get those glances. And of course, exciting moments or something, you'll notice something. So you can always like come back and like watch it again,
Yeah.
So
yep.
I think it's great.
It is great. Love it. And yeah, this year I'll be just coaching, but honestly, that's my favorite way to experience the weekend. So good luck to those that will be there. Perhaps I'll see you. It's going to be a lot of fun. The weather, knock on wood, is looking very favorable for race morning. So we're going to continue to manifest that stays the way it is. And hopefully everybody has good days. So that's a little by way of intro. And obviously it's apropos to also be talking about taper today, because they're in their final few days of taper, while others might be in their last 10 days, 3 weeks. Again, we've got a lot of races coming up here in the spring, and so there's a lot of people in this window. We've talked about taper a little bit in our intro a couple of weeks ago, but now we're going to dig into it some more, and then we'll also be talking about the post-race recovery phase and what that looks like. So we'll be hitting both today. As we get into the taper discussion, though, the first question becomes, why taper? Why do we do this? Why do we pull back in these final weeks, really regardless of what distance you're tackling?
Well, I know we're going to get into kind of some technical explanations, like of both the mental and the physical, but I always like to just present it in a way that just makes people say, aha, it's sort of like, hey, on race day, do you want to toe the line feeling exhausted, or do you want to feel like you're fresh? like your freshest self is just standing on the line. And we'll get into explaining how we get to that fresh or that peak feel, and explain it more technically so they know that I'm not just being crazy here. But I would always just plant that in my own mind and then, of course, pass it on to athletes. It's like the whole goal is that you're feeling both as strong as you possibly can feel when you go to the start line and as fresh as you possibly can. So if you compare the feeling that you have after your last long run with quality, chances are you woke up the next day and were like, I am beat down, tired. I need a little easy recovery jog to kind of flush this out. Do you want to go to the line feeling like that? Chances are 99% of people are going to say no, right? And so the whole idea is to put you on the line with your best shot possible.
Yep. Feeling fresh physically and mentally. You alluded to both sides of that equation, and that's really what it's for. It's for both things. You're repairing the body. And one thing I think people forget when they're in the throes of the race specific phase and they're at their peak mileage and they're doing their hardest work, they forget how resilient the body is. So you're able to generally, if you're managing it well, navigate that if you've built the foundation appropriately. And the body adapts to that load and manages it well. But that doesn't mean it's ready to go race then the next week, because there's things that need to be repaired, fitness that needs to be consolidated from that final bit of work. And then, of course, the mind needs to be fresh and ready to go as well. So it's the combination of both things that matter. And regardless of how long you taper, and we'll talk about the mechanics of that in a second and how many miles you're pulling back, there's this opportunity in the taper phase to get physically strong and ready by fully recovering from the hard work, as well as fully consolidating that work into your fitness, which, by the way, takes about 10 days, sometimes longer, to go from workout to actually being able to be used by your body from a fitness standpoint. So you need that window anyway to make sure that you can actually use the work that you've been doing all along. So there's a use the work part of it, and then there's obviously a physically ready and fresh, as you said, part of it in order to show up on that start line to give yourself the best chance. And then obviously mentally, you've got to go from all of that hard work where you're kind of grinding mentally and maybe feeling a little bit mentally run down to a point where you're almost not chomping at the bit. You're eager. You're like, oh man, I can't wait another day. It's time to go, which tends to be a feeling that pops up in that taper window. And so you want to be at that place. You want to be at that place where you're like, oh, okay, if I have to wait another day, I'm going to go crazy. And then you show up and you put it all together. Part of this, as we've talked about too, is also just signaling to the body that, hey, the big thing is coming. Get ready. And the body starts to put in place all of those response mechanisms to basically make sure that you can put your best foot forward when it matters.
Yeah. I think we have to give them the reminder, and we give them the reminder in the book, but it's like, it's that reminder that you, when we're doing hard work and stressful work, which we often associate with the idea of getting better, there's truth to it, but there's a delay. Like you said, 7 to 10 days later, you absorb and kind of feel the benefit of that workout. So it's like we're tearing down when we're working hard. When we're sleeping and going easy, that's when we're actually recovering and repairing, as you mentioned.
Yep.
And I think when they have that in their mind, it starts to make a little bit more sense. And I don't always want to do this. I mean, there is scientific backing to it. It's complexity theory by Professor Neil Thies. But again, I just like to say it simply and only quote people in the spirit of them trusting me, not thinking that I'm off on a tangent of my own ideas. But you start to see these little microcosms reflected everywhere. It's like in the same way that after a hard quality workout, you jog easy to recover from it, and then you follow it the next day with a recovery, or in the same way that we have the 2 hard weeks up and then the 1 week down to recover, it also makes sense that after like 20 to, let's say about 20 weeks or so, we use 3 weeks to come out of it. Like there's that like that principle guiding it all. It's like work hard or the wax on, wax off. Like
right.
It's throughout the whole system. So I hope it makes sense to them that this taper helps you recover and then quote peak to your best.
Yeah. I think it generally does, in the sense that it's a commonly accepted concept. Some people call it taper. Some people call it peaking phase. No matter what you call it, the idea is the same. But I do think sometimes when you're in it, you think, man, why am why am I doing this? Because you do start to sometimes, as we've talked about, feel like you're losing the edge, or you're getting out of shape, or you feel a little bit sluggish on those workouts. And we call that taper madness. We'll kind of cover that here in a second. And in those moments of doubt, you start to wonder, well, maybe I should do this where I don't taper and just like race straight off of, the hard work. And, you can do that. And I think some people could also still perform decently, but are they going to be able to put their very best foot forward? I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the why we taper. Let's get into the mechanics of it. And we present this a couple of different ways in terms of the tactical part, but just at the very highest level, what are we doing in the taper? We are pulling back volume primarily, and generally, depending on whether you're tapering for 1 or 2 or 3 weeks, that volume descent will look a little bit different. And we'll talk about what that means depending on your race distance. So you've got that happening. You also have in parallel your quality workouts. You keep them, they're still there. You keep that routine, but you pull back a little bit on the intensity, with the primary focus for us on race specific pacing during the taper, as well as just a touch of sharpening stuff to make sure you're feeling comfortable at race pace. And we have a cadre of taper workouts that we kind of come back to, year after year. And I think part of that is we know it works, we know what we like, but I think also when you're an athlete, regardless of whose system you're using, I think there's something about having familiarity in this phase of work. In the other phases of work, I like variety. I like to mix it up for people so that not only that keeps it interesting, but also keeps their body on its toes, so to speak. But in the taper, we want to eliminate that variability and stick with the stuff that we know and we're used to, and we start to have that familiarity with. And so we often come back to the same handful of taper workouts in each of our cycles while we mix it up elsewhere. So we're pulling back a little bit on quality, keeping the routine. So to the extent that you have, your days set and you're doing whatever strength or mobility on given days, you want to keep pretty much all of that in place, in the sense that you want the body to recognize that, hey, I'm just doing the normal things I'm usually doing on the days I normally do it, but we've changed the volume, meaning we've pulled back a little bit on those days and we've reduced the intensity a little bit, but essentially you still have those placeholders. The one caveat to that might be strength, where maybe in that last week you don't do pure strength workouts, but I do still like to keep those blocks of time and use it for something else. Just use it for mobility, use it for foam rolling, use it for something that's going to keep the body moving in a way that is comfortable and smooth while also not disrupting the routine. So we keep the routine, we pull back miles, we pull back intensity on the quality. Those are the basic mechanics at the highest level of taper. Am I missing anything?
No, we're in alignment.
Okay, cool. So let's talk about the details of that. From a mileage standpoint first, in the taper phase, and we give kind of 2 ways to look at it. Percentages and what I prefer, which is to just go by absolute volume reductions. And maybe we should talk first about what this looks like depending on your race distance. If you're doing a marathon, typically we recommend a 3-week taper as a starting point. We should come back to when somebody might consider a 2-week taper, but 3 weeks for the marathon, 2 weeks for the half, 1 week for shorter distances like 5Ks and 10Ks is generally the rule of thumb that we use on taper. The taper is an individual exercise, so I do think at some level you have to practice with what works for you, and maybe it's a little longer, maybe it's a little bit shorter. And so that's one part of it, is how many weeks. And then how do you actually pull back the miles in those weeks? The rule of thumb I like to use, which is a rule of thumb, so it doesn't work perfectly in every circumstance, but I think it's pretty good, and I think it's less confusing than percentages, is to just cut back 1 mile per run per week outside of the long run. The long run's obviously going to be a more dramatic taper, but every other run, 1 mile per run per week as you get into those final 3 weeks. Makes the math really simple. Again, you keep the distance, you keep some positive distance on each of those days, but it simplifies the math on the percentages, which I think can sometimes be confusing, especially when you get to that last week and where you're like, does the race count in the percentage or not? Which is a fairly common question. So 1 mile per run per week. And that starts wherever it starts. So if you're doing a 3-week taper, then you'll be cutting back 3 miles on each of those runs. If you're doing a 2-week taper, you'll be cutting back 2 miles. So 1-week taper, 1 mile. Again, with the idea that you'll have to individualize a little bit off of that, but that's a good baseline.
Yeah.
What do you tell people on mileage?
I approach it very similarly to you. I like to peel miles by day. Largely because, and honestly, when you do that, you'll find that the percentage is pretty close, and pretty close, I think, is the key word to say there, because in the spirit of helping people and giving structure, because that's the best way to teach, is you make things black and white first and then later teach the gray. I wanted to emphasize those words pretty close, because we might say something like, hey, take a 25% reduction, but you don't want to approach the math there as though you're an accountant and you have to get it right down to the penny.
Right.
And it blows my mind how many people will do that. They'll almost shocking, like in a shocked and surprised like fashion, say like, Coach, like this is a 28% reduction and the book says 25%. And it's like,
yeah.
Oh man, like how do I come off with grace when I respond to this?
Yeah. Yes. Well, and then it can be confusing. It's like, well, if I'm reducing 25% off of a 7-mile run, then I'm doing a 4.8 mile run. Like, no. Like, keep the math simple.
Yes.
Like, this is why I don't do the, percentages, because people get into that headspace. And in this taper mode, you don't need to be doing hard math. You don't need to be worrying about 0.1 or 2 here or there. It's just the general theme, pull back a little bit.
Yeah.
And so yes, whether you prefer the percentages and then rounding perhaps to the next whole number, or the math that I use, which, by the way, just to point out, can break down for those higher mileage runners. Sometimes I recommend for those higher mileage runners that they pull back a little bit more than 1 mile per run per week. But anybody that's in that like 40 to 60 mile range for a marathon, that's a pretty good barometer. 1 mile per run per week, with, the caveat that you'll have to customize it for you. So that's mileage. And I guess here I want to come back to the 2-week versus the 3-week, or the 1 week versus the 2 week for a half. When would you recommend, if people are asking that question, when would you recommend they consider playing with that duration of taper?
I think it has to do both. Well, there's always the personalized side, so how experienced they are, and this lends itself to an experienced runner. But it's also how high volume is. Like an 80 mile a week person training for a half, who's also utilizing 20-mile long runs in preparation for that half, they're going to scale down a little more. But someone who maybe reached 35 miles as a max in their training for a half, and their longest long run might have been a 12 leading into their, or even a 14 just to go slightly past race distance. For those, I'm going to give them a little bit shorter recovery time, because the total load or total stress load in the race-specific phase isn't quite as high as that 80-mile-a-week very experienced athlete. So they're going to have a little bit, they're going to lean towards a little bit longer side, whereas someone fairly new and I don't want to call it, this is always danger here when it comes to psychology and feelings, but it's like, just for all intents and purposes, on the lower mileage side, they're
no judgment there.
Yeah,
just,
exactly.
Wherever your starting point is, that's all good. Interesting. I actually in some ways think about it the opposite in terms of the shorter taper. Like, for example, for me, I believe that I tend to do better personally for the marathon with the 2-week taper versus a 3-week taper. And I think part of that is because I tend to be a higher mileage runner that enjoys the higher mileage, and the body's kind of craving that in a sense. So if my taper is too extreme, then I find I get stale or feel like wonky a little bit. So doing a 2-week taper where I'm keeping the mileage a little bit higher has typically been helpful for me. But what I generally say is don't question it. If you're newer, don't question it. For the marathon, go 3 weeks. For the half, go 2 weeks. For the 5K or 10K, go 1 week. And it isn't until you get more experienced that, and maybe you're just curious, or you think it might work for you, or you have this kind of gut feeling like, hey, maybe that would actually be better for me. And you've got a bunch of races under your belt, then try it on your next one, but don't use that as something you do out of the gate. Don't do it flippantly. Don't do it without a bunch of experience, because, it's been pretty tried and true as a method for not just our runners, but for a lot of runners across a lot of different types of programs. So stick with the tried and true, until you start to get a little bit more experience. And if you're curious and questioning and, hey, maybe this would be for me, try it. And if it works, great. Use it again. If it doesn't work, go back.
Yep.
So that's miles. Another thing I want to mention here is, because I think it's kind of an interesting asterisk to all of this discussion about miles. There are scenarios, and you and I are both familiar with these, when I have to advise on someone doing what I call an extreme taper. If they're in an injury mode, or they're recovering from something, or maybe they get sick, then I might have someone do the bare minimum mileage for whatever duration of the taper you need, just so that they can get healthy and be healthy on the starting line. Because if someone's nursing an injury that requires a reduction in volume in order to get healthy, then that's going to be more important than getting whatever taper volume you think you need. Or if someone's sick and they're needing to recover and be fully healthy from that, then you might have them go into this kind of more extreme taper mode where, you're maintaining your runs, but you're doing them at much lower volume than would be the typical prescription we just gave, so that you can get to the start line healthy and give yourself the best chance to overcome whatever injury or overcome whatever sickness. I remember having to do this with my last marathon that I really raced, was Houston in 2024. I got bronchitis a couple weeks before, kind of went into this extreme taper mode in order to be as healthy as I could be on the start line. And so I wasn't doing the normally prescribed taper miles. I was basically just doing minimum mileage every day, just to kind of keep the legs moving, but try to invest everything else I could in recovery from that sickness. And ultimately, I didn't get what I wanted that day, struggled at the end because of, coughing up things and all of that. But I do think I gave myself the best chance by kind of going into this extreme taper mode. So it's an exception to the rule that would apply really only in the circumstances of getting sick or having an injury that you're managing. But it's just, sometimes you have to ask yourself, what's more important, getting to the start line as healthy as I can, or getting in these runs, or getting in the volume that would normally be prescribed. And usually in that case, the answer is the first thing, right? Get as healthy as you can.
Yeah. I had a woman who just experienced that after her last final quality long run. It went so well. But she did text and say, I do not feel right today at all. Woke up that Monday sick as a dog, did the run on Sunday. And so I had to almost take like a saddle approach, because for 4 days she was struggling to even get down food. So nothing to do with the running, everything to do with being sick. And I was like, hey, we're not coming out and you're just hit day one that you feel better. You're going to go crush what was already written in the spreadsheet. Yep. Spreadsheet serves you, you don't serve it. So I had to introduce her to first a 30-minute as a checkpoint. We got a green light on that day. Then I went 4 miles, 6 miles, and I was able to get her to a 10-mile long run. And then I was like, now we can go into that final week, which is this week that we're in right now, leading into Boston.
Yep.
And she's just humming along in her body. I was honestly thinking less about legs and quality of workouts and physiology and more about that overall homeostasis of,
right.
And to see her peppy and gliding along, and normal Monday felt like a normal Monday.
Yep.
That I was like, that's what I was going for.
Yep. And those are exceptions to the circumstances. Another exception that I think about is if somebody's doing a race to finish the distance and is less concerned about time, and maybe they had a disruption in their training that caused them to miss a long run or something like that. sometimes I'll shorten their taper in that circumstance. It's like, okay, we don't need a 3-week taper if we have a different level of goal, so to speak, and we're just trying to cover the distance. We've had some disruption. Let's push it to a 2-week taper, get that extra long run in, and then pull back from there, because we're less concerned about precision relative to the result and more concerned about just getting it done. So that's another example where I might shorten a taper, or manage the taper differently, I should say. So again, there are exceptions to the rules, as there are with every rule in the book. And we were just wanting to give some examples there of some things to think about when you're managing through those exceptions. Let's talk about quality workouts. Again, you're kind of pulling back intensity. And as we said, we have a pretty good stable of taper workouts that we come back to again and again. And I would say you and I have slightly different styles relative to which ones we prefer, but we're kind of pulling from the same set. So what do you prefer in terms of quality workouts? And we'll use the marathon as an example here when it comes to the taper.
I'll answer as though it's like a plumb line with no human in mind, but rather just a collective answer for all humans. Yes, I do have a playbook, or quote, a plumb line. And then I do deviate. And sometimes I even change it up in virtual programming and everything. But where I'll start is I like to work 800 to 10K pace in the first week, one last touch of speed. 2 weeks out, it's 2x2 miles typically at race pace. And then the week of 3 by a mile. And I'll give the disclaimer first, because that last week is always a tough one, where it's like, well, if we have them practice race pace, it could feel difficult, and that can mess with them psychologically. And I do understand that. But this is something I think it's really important to pay attention to thoughts that will never leave you. If you have an old memory and it just surfaces on its own and it comes back, there's a reason for it, and you should pay attention to it. And this always comes to mind when this taper conversation comes up. So growing up as a golfer, I had amazing coaches around me, and many who would say, don't stand around the cup and practice 3-foot putts, because if you miss a 3-foot putt before you go into your round, that's going to eat at you, and then you'll be terrified of 3-foot putts. I had a different approach. I listened to my coaches, of course, and found out, back to that personalized idea, that if I don't see myself make a 3-footer, then I won't leave the green. So my outlook was always, I need psychologically to see that 3-foot putt, what should be, as an experienced golfer, the easiest putt on earth. I need to see it go into the hole before I start my round. So I inverted the philosophy, actually. I didn't care if I missed 10 before I made the first one. And it's strange. Every time I think about, like, do I want to change it up on race week? I'm like, I would rather leave the athlete with the experience of having practiced the rhythm that they will run for the majority of race day. I know we start them slow and we ask them to run hard at the end, but the majority of their miles are going to be spent at race day. And so because of that little analogy I gave, or anecdote with the golf thing, it's the same feeling that rises up in me, where I'm like, I'm very comfortable prescribing race pace the week of the race, because I want the rhythm in the legs. And of course, anytime an athlete says, I just always get worked up when I can't hit it, fine, yeah, going forward, I might give them something different. But generally speaking, I'm going to come out of the gate that's our starting point, and then I deviate from the plumb line based on personal preferences or feedback I got from them, etc. But that's my starting point.
Yep. I like that you mentioned the psychological impact, and on both sides. What if I hit it? What if I don't hit it? Because it could also just be a really smooth confidence builder. It's like, yeah, I can do 1 mile at marathon pace, and that feels great, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you and I, similar thoughts in terms of those 3 weeks out, 2 weeks out. We both like 800 to 10K pace, for example, for marathoners 3 weeks out. We both like race pace 2 weeks out in some form. And then in that last week, personally, I have 2 go-to final kind of workouts that I go to, depending on what my venue is, what I have access to, whether I'm at a track or on a more of a loop style fartlek venue for the workout. and I will do what I call cruise 400s, where people are just doing 400s at given paces that are relatively slow with plenty of rest, usually starting them at half marathon pace, regardless of what their race distance is. And then I'll also do like a 2-3 fartlek, 5 to 6 rounds of 2 minutes on it, tempo effort, alternating with 3 minutes easy. Because I like the idea that, or I think that last week's workout doesn't matter from a fitness standpoint. So if it doesn't matter, then I want to do something that gives me confidence, makes me feel good. I call it a sanity workout that last week, because that's all you're really doing is keeping your legs sharp and your mind from going crazy, because there's no fitness being built in that last week workout. So then it's just like, okay, what are the stimuli that are going to make me feel good and confident and give me a little bit of a stimulus so that the legs feel good and the mind isn't crazy. That's all I'm going for. And those are the 2 workouts that I have landed on that I tend to prescribe for that reason. But it kind of goes back to a point of that workout doesn't matter. Really.
I'm glad you emphasized that.
Unless you overdo it, right? Like if you go too hard and you race your race on that day, whether it's the Tuesday before or the Wednesday before, then you've screwed up. But outside of that, if you have a reasonably manageable workout of any variety that would be appropriate in terms of intensity for the last week before a marathon, it doesn't matter what it is. It could be anything that gives you a little bit of physical stimulus with enough mental stimulus to keep your mind sane. And whatever dose you need to keep your mind happy and sane is probably the right answer, right? And for me, typically, one of those 2 workouts is what works. And that's also what I tend to see works for people. And for you, it's a little different, and that's cool. But the mechanics don't really matter at all, right? It's just a matter of some stimulus that gets the body and the mind or in that last workout ready as can be for race day. So
I'm so glad you emphasized that it doesn't matter. And because that's the key thing. I think if listeners know that, then they'll understand why there's variety there. And a light bulb went off for me when you had brought up the Cruise 400s, because I did change my own play with a guy that's racing Boston. I've worked with him and I know him so well. And I can tell you, never once, no matter how hard the workout is, if I gave him something for the track, some kind of intervals for the track, he walks off happy. I mean, this guy, like his cadence starts to increase in the rate at which he's speaking. And there's a lightheartedness and sort of a peppiness. And I was just like, all right, he's getting the Cruise 400s. Like, I trust everything you've written in programming. So I was like, I pulled one from your playbook, and he nice. Actually got. I have 2 athletes going to Boston on the 1-to-1 roster, and one got the mile repeats, and he got the 400s. But again, it was personalized, right? And without that confident knowing, I know he responds well to it. I don't deviate from my plumb line. So
which is good. And I think anybody listening, you got to ask yourself, what's going to give me confidence? What's going to make me feel sharp? Without thinking about the fitness stimulus, just think about those 2 things in that last week, and the actual content of that can look a lot of different ways. Okay, third thing, in this kind of mechanics of taper is routine. And we've talked about keeping that routine. So if you're running on any given day, keep those running days. Now, before we dig into the other parts of the routine, because I want to talk a little bit about strength training here, is I do want to talk about that. The only place I deviate from changing routine in terms of the days you're running during a taper is typically in the final few days, right? Depending on what day your race is on. If it's a Monday race like Boston, a Sunday race, a Saturday race, those final few days might get tweaked a little bit in order to set up the right cadence for you. We always like a shakeout run the day before. Give me 25 to 30 minutes, super easy with some strides at the end. The day before, we like that as a dose to just, again, make sure you're not flat going into race day itself. Although I've had people say, hey, I don't like that. I'd rather take the day off. And if that works for you, go for it, right? But typically I advise 25 to 30 minutes. But as you're thinking about those days before, I often sync that up with your travel schedule. And to me, this is like where I think some of the nuance comes into tweaking the final few days, which is when are you flying? When are you getting there? And I like for people, especially if they have a longer travel period, you know, and for most people, they're flying usually more than 2 hours to go to a destination race. And then they're in an Uber or on a train, whatever it may be, they're sitting. Mm-hmm. And I like people to get as many short, easy runs in once you arrive as possible, so that we can flush out some of that travel junk. I'm just sitting there on a plane or sitting there in a car or on a bus. And so if you're, for example, you know, flying to Boston on a Friday and, you know, you're getting in at 7 p.m. or something, don't have time to run that day, fine. But give me 2 shakeouts, one Saturday, one Sunday, and then go race on Monday. And then maybe you take Friday off. Mm-hmm. So that's where there's a little bit of variation in routine that might happen right around the race itself, depending on when you're traveling and when the race is. Any comments there or tweaks you would
No,
have?
I'm on the same page. I always on the front end prescribe it as day before. But yeah, I also call that sweating off the plane. I like, you know, sometimes that's just like less about, like if the volume's low enough and the effort's low enough, like I see it as, it's not going to make or break or anything. It's just I'm with you is all I'm saying.
Yeah. And also I like it mentally too, because it's like, all right, you kind of just get the cobwebs from travel out, so to speak. So then the other part of the routine, you know, we like to keep the running days as much as possible, with maybe the exception at the end, is strength training. Any other routine you might have that is physical activity related, generally we tell you to keep that the same, but just change the content of what that looks like. And that can be, you know, again, very individualized and very depending on who you are and what you think you need. But if I just speak from personal experience, if, you know, and I strength train twice a week and just did the stage race last month, in prep for that, I basically kept my routine twice a week, and I had a 3-week taper for that stage race. I kept my routine, so I was doing 2 days each week, but we pulled back significantly on volume and in terms of number of reps as well as on weight. And in the last week, we didn't do anything traditional in terms of lifting, but we just did basic mobility work, consistent with movements that I was used to. So we weren't introducing any new movements, but we were just getting that range of motion going, moving the body, doing body weight type of mobility type stuff. And that worked really well for me. Now, some people, that's what they would want to do. Some people, you know, maybe take off strength that last week, but I like to, at least before that, keep the routine as much as possible. Just recognize that it's time to pull back, taper that intensity and volume as well as your running intensity and volume.
Yep.
And, you know, and then any other activities you're doing, yoga, Pilates, whatever those things are, I think you have to consider them individually and just make sure that, again, keep the routine as the general rule of thumb, but pull back on intensity a little bit. And maybe that last week modify if you feel like you need to. Mm-hmm. Because at that point, does it matter you go to yoga that week? Maybe not. If it's going to compromise what the race brings or what you bring to the race.
It's the how you do it. Everything that you're doing is the how you do it. Like all of this should be done in the word taper. Everything should be tapering. And the key word being intensity. It's like anything that you're doing, quote, in the name of growth, like I'm pushing, I'm grinding because I want to get better. It's like that's what you want to stay away from, is pushing, grinding, that kind of language, and therefore that kind of effort. It's like everything should be coming down as you move towards this, while at the same time, we're still saying go to these places because, yeah, if you completely interrupt your entire pattern, that's where you start to get messed with psychologically. Like you're just like off.
Yeah. Yeah, you want you want everything to be as familiar as possible, basically, so the body doesn't freak out on you. So that's the routine. Keep it as much as possible, but just think individually about tapering some of those activities as you go. Now we got to talk about the mental side of taper, which is this kind of concept of taper madness, taper crazies. People have different terms for it. For me, as someone who's lined up and finished 22 marathons. It's something I've faced every single time in some form or fashion. I do think I've gotten better at managing this taper madness because I've got the tools to use. And again, we talked about this a couple episodes ago, and it was on our Friday Q&A several weeks ago in terms of how you manage the taper madness. And I've got kind of two camps of strategies to think about here, which I'll recap now, and then you can add to it. But we've got the associative strategies and the dissociative strategies. My favorite and the place to start is to, when you have the nerves, fears, anxieties that come up around the taper, is to associate with the race by digging into and using that mental energy towards preparing in whatever way you need to prepare, from developing your race plan to writing out your nutrition and hydration plan to visualizing the race to preparing pre-race logistics and reservations or travel plans. Associate and use that energy to prepare. Don't beat yourself up for those thoughts, fears, and anxieties, but just shift them to something productive. And then on the other side, dissociative strategies, when that doesn't work or when that creates more anxiety, dissociate. Find ways to take your mind off of it. Mm-hmm. Read a book, binge a show, hang out with friends who aren't going to bring up the race, whatever it might be to help you take your mind away from it. Meditate so that you can keep the mind as at peace as possible, but recognizing that throughout this entire window, these things are going to pop up, mm-hmm. and you've got to consistently manage it in one of those two ways. And if you do that, you'll get through it. Mm-hmm. But it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah. I don't think I have a lot to add. It's just more of I'll just keep expanding on it, like just examples. Like someone recently posted on our boards in the virtual groups leading up into Boston, and she had mentioned something to the effect of like, you know, I absolutely believe in the rogue programming in the system. It served me so many times. And I believe in my teammates. I watch them crush race after race after race, but it's so hard to like get rid of the negative thoughts when it comes to my own race. And of course, back to having defaults and everything, I'm always going to lean towards like my encouragement. And this was similar to the answer that I gave, was like, I thought of like meditation techniques where when I first learned, and I'm talking not advanced meditation, I'm just talking common dudes, like guy that doesn't know a lot about it, just trying to practice clearing his head. I moved towards the idea of like, all right, I was first taught, if you're looking out a window and you see a bird fly in and a bird fly out, there's nothing you can really do about that bird. You could give it meaning. You could, quote, attach to it by saying, what did that bird mean? And why did that bird fly through my window? Or you could just say, birds fly in and out of you. And that's it. That has nothing to do with me. And then the carryover is that's those are our thoughts. Our thoughts, they are not like, I'm not my hand, right? But it's a part of me, sure. And thoughts, you have to see them the same way. It's like you can attach and identify it and make it yours and turn negative and become self-loathing. Or you could say, oh man, just like birds fly, so do thoughts. They just fly, they come and go. So clearly my tactic is to disassociate. That's my default. But there is also, you know, I thought about this a little later on after posting. I don't care what answer I ever give. I'm always going to end up overthinking it. And I've also used this before in life, and it's an old concept of, I think the way you say it is premeditatio malarum, and it's basically the premeditation of evils, i.e. playing out fears to their end. So literally, I think if someone, and I'm talking about the negative side, I know with disassociate and associate, you were talking about like either associate with the race or disassociate from the race and go do other things. But also with negative or positive, you can either attach, not necessarily ignore and suppress, but just recognize that came and that went. Cool, whatever, let it be. Or this concept of premeditating evils or playing out fears to their worst scenario. Sometimes that's what it takes. Like maybe you need to grab a pen and you say, okay, yeah, I do drop my goo. I do show up and I had no shoes in the bag. It is raining, all the worst conditions. And so you just have to sit, like, it's like if you literally can't let it be like a bird that flies, then fine, go into it and play it to its end. Like, what are you going to do if you forgot your shoes? What are you going to do if it's raining? What are you going to do if someone bumps you and they piss you off and now you're filled with rage in mile 5 and you were hoping to remain calm? Like, if the thoughts are eating at you and you tried the bird idea and you couldn't disassociate, well, then the answer is actually then fine. Let's look them right in the eye and go after them and play them to their end. Because often you will find whatever you're scared of
there.
isn't. Yeah, you got it. Yeah. I mean, I knew you already knew it, but yeah.
Yeah. And, these are all, different ways to deal with whatever's coming up for you. I like the idea of kind of observing the thoughts and not attaching negative or positive to them. The bird flew past the window. I'm feeling nerves. I'm afraid of what it might feel like at mile 21. Those things are normal. Observe them. Don't judge yourself for having them. Move on to then what can be productive. Or, as you say, if you can't, dig into it. Well, what could happen at mile 21? What's the worst case scenario?
And if it does, what will I do?
What will you do? Go do it. Go deal with it. The other thing I, like to do in this to counterbalance this, which is a slightly different version really of the association point, is to just focus on what you've done. Go back, look at the work you've done, look at the training you've logged, the hard workouts, the long run workouts, and use that as a source of confidence. And don't focus on what you didn't do, because there's always going to be some of that. Focus on what you did do and what that means about your preparation. And that's another way to build confidence through the taper madness. But we get it. It's real. It's not going anywhere. Just learn to deal with it the best way you can. And that may take some practice. All right. So that's taper. Then we race. We come out of the race and we get to the fifth phase, which is this post-race recovery phase. And we've talked about this a little bit already in prior episodes, but we have to make sure we're recovering from the hard thing that we just did. Detraining, which is a scary thing to think about because we can't just linearly expect us to keep going up and to the right. We've got to detrain, pull back, exhale, as I like to say, from the work, let the body recover, heal, and then we build again, starting back at the base phase. So kind of 4 bullets we've got here on the post-race recovery phase as reminders for those that are racing soon. 1, I always remind people after the race, especially, you got to feel the feels. Whatever happens, good, bad, feel the feels. And, some people say, well, you should only do it for 24 hours. Like Steve Magnus is one area. I love Steve Magnus. Agree with a lot of what he says. There's one area where I disagree with Steve Magnus. He's like, give yourself 24 hours and only 24 hours. I don't think that's reasonable because sometimes the feels might last longer than 24 hours. If you've been preparing for something for 6 months and you go have a good race, a bad race, the worst race of your life, whatever it is, 24 hours isn't enough time to process that fully, whether it be good or bad, or to celebrate it fully. If you have the best day ever, I don't want you just lingering on that for 24 hours. I want you to let it soak in.
Yeah.
Give yourself some days to go celebrate that. Right. And if you're mad and sad and frustrated, like, let it linger. And it's going to go away. And obviously at some point you got to cut that off. But I've found for most reasonable people, it might linger for a day or 2 or 3 or even a week. And then after that, it's going to start to dissipate. Your feelings are going to start to change. Logic's going to return again. But let those feelings come. And this one's hard, I think, especially because, regardless of how it goes, you're going to get friends and family that are telling you, you did great, and you may feel that way. You may not feel that way. And so sometimes there's this internal friction of, I've got all these people telling me I did great and I should be so happy with what I did. And if you're not feeling that internally, it creates this disconnect that can be hard or grating or sometimes annoying because you're like, I don't want people to tell me that because I don't think I did great. And you probably did do great, but it's okay to feel like you didn't. And let those feelings linger. Be mad, be sad, be frustrated. Just let it go. Let it come out. My only rule with feeling the feels is that you don't make any decisions during this window of time. It's like feel the feels first, but don't then sign up for a race immediately or decide you need to change your whole training approach immediately or decide, that your shoes are the worst thing ever. Whatever it is, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater during this window of time. Just let the feelings come and process them as you may. and give yourself a window of time for that.
Mm-hmm. I would say at least a week, just because that whole first week you're going to be physically recovering anyway, which I know we'll talk about. But I'm like, I think, yeah, I never knew. I didn't know Magnus had said 24 hours, and I adore the guy too. But I'm like, that whole week is for, hey man, that week, that's your week. Like good or bad on race day, that's your week. Like,
yeah.
You want to sleep in, you want to feel good, feel bad, whatever.
Celebrate it, right? Go out with take your family out to a nice meal or whatever it is. Like you got to celebrate it. It's like we work too hard not to. And so I'm not a believer in the 24-hour rule that Magnus has. So that's the first thing. Second thing, you then have to take the time to recover, which, the rough rule of thumb on this is that it takes about a day for every mile you're running. Or we like to say roughly 3 weeks for a marathon, a couple weeks for a half, a week for a hard 5K or 10K. That's just a window of time. And the soreness will be there first. And, especially for the marathoners, you may not be able to walk downstairs or you may have to go backwards down a ramp or something like that. That's normal. And eventually that soreness is going to go away. Might take 3 days, might take 5 days, who knows? But when that goes away, the body is still working to repair itself. And just because we aren't getting those physical pain cues and soreness doesn't mean the body isn't still recovering. And so you have to give yourself that time and you have to take it and enjoy it. I think the detraining process for long-term potential building is as important as the training process, right? Because it's if you want to create longevity in the sport, longevity in your life, longevity with your ability to continue getting better, you have to have these windows of time. And they shouldn't be crazy long. It shouldn't be 2 months. It should be 3 weeks where you're keeping things pretty relaxed, pretty chill. And yes, you're going to be running, as we'll talk about here in a second. You're going to be moving. You're going to be doing stuff to help flush the legs, but you're not in any formal training mode, or you're not thinking I have to run today, so therefore I'm doing it. You give it some flex.
Yep. I'm super conservative in that first week. And just like we talked about, like a taper is highly personal. This is highly personal as well. I'm just going to tell this because I think it's interesting. It came to mind, and it's something that was always in my head when I was first growing in the sport. And that was, I read the book Duel in the Sun. And it was the showdown between Dickie Beardsley and Alberto Salazar. And Salazar was picked, and he thought Beardsley would not even be a challenge. And then all of a sudden, Beardsley runs him into the ground and made him work for it. And in the end, Salazar wins, but Beardsley goes and runs a 10-miler the next day, and Salazar was wrecked. And so I'm like, look, these are two professional athletes. The guy that won the race was wrecked and needed so much recovery. The guy that actually lost and ran, and we're talking a few seconds difference in finish time, was free enough to jog easy 10, right? And I'm just using that example because I think it highlights just how varied it could be. Yeah. And by no means am I prescribing 10 milers or even running the next day. Right. What I freaking love is walking, and I always push it. And I think I want to turn this to a question. No matter how many times I encourage people to use that week for walking, I'm not saying a lot of them, some I've been surprised. Some will actually take me up on it. But I think it makes so much intuitive sense to me that it's like you have a typical morning where you're out for let's say an hour jog. What would prevent you from just walking for an hour like that? It could be so easy, calming. You could use that time to reflect on your race and feel the feels like you mentioned. But it's interesting how few athletes actually take me up on that. And I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but do you get that? And B, why do you think there's resistance?
I don't know. It's a good question.
You get resistance?
I think there's the walking, running, there is an ego difference there. But I'm a big proponent of easy movement. It's our third bullet here on the post-race recovery phase. Easy movement to me, obviously sleep and refueling, those are critical elements to this post-race recovery period. But easy movement, I kind of put at the top of recovery modalities during this phase. And I even a gentle walk the day of, if you're doing a marathon, where you get out of your hotel, get moving. I mean, I think about, what I was doing with this stage race back in March. My recovery principles were refuel, rehydrate, easy movement. Don't sit. Keep the body moving, because you got to go do something hard again the next day. And the marathons where I've felt the best afterwards have been the ones where either because I wanted to or because I didn't want to but had to, because I was like walking back to my hotel and it was further than I had hoped or whatever. I had to walk, and that walking really, really helped with recovery. So I'm a huge proponent of that. Day of, in the days after, I typically don't recommend someone run until the third day after a marathon if they want to. Doesn't mean they have to, but if they're going to do a run and they're feeling up for it, three days later is okay in my book, but keep it short, 3-ish miles. But I'm also okay if they're just like, hey, I'll go do a 30, 40 minute walk instead. So I agree with you completely. I do think there's a mental and / ego disconnect where for some reason as runners, we don't view walking as training. But I would say I would smash that paradigm in this block of work or recovery, and also in any block of work or recovery. It's like there's benefits to walking in any phase. And, that's probably an episode for another day. But but get your easy movement on, and it should be easy and pleasant. Think walking the dog in the park kind of imagery, right? Nothing intense. Or I love when someone's in a situation where they're in a cool city and they want to do some sightseeing. Don't do that before the race. Do it after the race, because that'll force you to move. And that's a perfect way to recover. Now, don't do anything crazy, of course, but yeah, go do your sightseeing the day after, and that'll be perfect for getting back in the groove. So easy movement is key. Obviously, refueling, rehydrating. One thing on the refueling point that I want to call out here, there was a study done recently on athletes that did 100-miler. And I think it was Leadville, if I'm not mistaken, but a big 100-mile race. And they tracked both the fueling and the hydration of several athletes in the race and post-race in terms of the amount of calories their body was using and burning, or taking in and burning. And, obviously during the race, you think, okay, I need to get those calories, right? And people will say you need 200 calories per hour or more, especially in this higher carb kind of paradigm we're in. And you think, oh, of course that makes sense. I'm running hard. I'm going 100 miles. I got to fuel. The thing that was crazy and interesting about this study was then looking at calorie burn the next day and the day after the 100-miler. And I don't have the exact numbers in my head, so, kind of ballpark it, but the amount of calories burned the next day while completely stationary post 100-mile race was something really close to what they burned during the race itself, because the body was in repair mode. And then the next day, still much higher than normal baseline, but, a little bit reduced from that first day post. And so it was just a reminder, and I actually sent it to my runners here in Austin, just a reminder that when you do a big run, 20 miles, doesn't have to be a 100-miler, the fuel burn is obviously happening during, but it's also still happening afterwards. So you got to make sure you're recovering with the proper refueling afterwards as well. And, when you're doing a training run, that'll be different than when you're doing a race. And I don't think I generally need to convince anyone to eat a lot of food after a hard effort, like a marathon or a half marathon. But remember, that's a part of the process. And we don't like to say you earned that, but I would say you're obligated to give your body that, because it just did the hard thing.
Yeah.
So refuel, rehydrate, and get in that easy movement. And you'll do that for a period of 2 to 3 weeks for half or full, where you're running, but you're keeping it really chill and mellow. I recommend typically 2 days that first week after a marathon, then you go to 3, then you go to 4. You're building volume just a hair over those 3 weeks. Don't introduce quality until after that. And then wherever you are in that third week back, you set that as your new baseline, and then you go back to your normal base building rules where we start over and we do it again.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the post-race recovery. But as we've said, it's such an important part of the overall process and trajectory, and you just don't want to skimp on it. Give your body what it needs to repair and recover from 20 plus weeks of work and from a big race day.
Yep. I'm glad you emphasized the refuel part, because I always would whisper the workout's still going on.
Yep.
That was before I got us off track with the walk question. That was in my head. So I'm glad you put a double emphasis on that.
Yeah. And the science supports it too.
Mm-hmm.
So recover, reset, detrain to retrain to a higher place. And got to remind people that you're going to feel sluggish. You're going to feel suddenly out of shape in this window of time. You're not. This is your body's way of slowing you down so that you're forced to recover in a sense. So it's giving you the signals that, hey, we're not ready to do something, right? Mm-hmm. And so you're not going to be sharp. You're going to feel like you're out of shape. You're not. But you need this process in order to hit this temporary short-term trough, so to speak, so that you can build again to the next higher peak. And that's just the way our body works.
Mm-hmm.
All right. That's it. That's a wrap on the phases, all 5 of them. We started with base. We got to the aerobic strength phase, talked race specific last week, and now taper and recovery phases. Pretty good stuff. Any final thoughts?
I think the theme that kept popping up a few times is just that I would say, like, take the principles and have a default. But the theme that kept presenting itself is just how personalized both these sides are, both the taper and the recovery. Because even as you were just explaining that last little piece, I was thinking about how, like, sometimes you finish a race and it's like bones that ache for a week. And then for other people, and most people, honestly, this is also, even if you have bones aching, it's like soft tissue. But I've had times where it's like I have these adrenaline surges where my brain's forecasting this desire to, like, get out and run, but it's like I stand up and everything feels off. So it's like that the personalized piece, I guess, is the emphasis in this total 6-week conversation, because it's the 3 weeks of taper and then the 3 weeks of coming out, post race. Yep. It's like, know your plumb lines, know your defaults. And then ask yourself, what's aching in me, or what when I say I'm exhausted, is it like brain fog, or is it like I've got creaky bones, or whatever it may be? Personalize.
Yeah, which is the part where you're listening to your body, and what works one time or what you do one time might be different than what you do the next based on what it's telling you. So yeah, we can script this, we can plan this, we can talk about it on podcasts, but you still in the moment have to say, what's it telling me, and respond accordingly. And start to develop that intuition for being present with both of these phases of work. That's easier said than done, but something that you gain with experience, for sure. All right, as we wrap this one, I want to talk about one thing, which is an opportunity to come up in training with us. So our fall race of choice, where we're sending all of our athletes and we choose typically a fall race every year. This year, it's Indianapolis. We're going to Indianapolis, second weekend in November. They've got a half, they've got a full, they've got a 5K, I think, too. And so if you're interested in training with us and then experiencing that weekend with us, which is always a good time in the community that we build and develop with all of the fun things that we do, shakeouts and pre-race pep talks and post-race parties. If you're interested in that, then we've got a training option for you. And it'd be fun for you to jump in with this specific block of work. Technically, from a in-person training perspective in Dallas or Houston, our fall training blocks start in the first weekend in May, or actually second weekend, I guess, because that's Mother's Day weekend. And then for our virtual groups, that first week in June 1st, and beyond. And we've got levels of virtual groups basically for anybody, depending on your starting point. And so check it out. And if you're interested, you can look at our website, roguerunning.com, or you can just email us, coaching@roguerunning.com. It'd be fun to have some listeners join us on the Indy journey.
Mm-hmm. Especially if they've read the book and then heard, like we just finished taper and post-race recovery, and then it's like, boom, put it into motion.
Put it all into motion and come do a half or full or a 5K with us in Indy. So want to make that our little mini plug today on Rogue offerings. And with that, we'll wrap this. You can always check us out also on Instagram at Rogue Running for our Friday Q&A, 2 p.m. Central on Friday. And with that, we'll wrap it. We'll talk to you guys next week.